everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my sewing room. This week we are going to pick right back up on the 1890s purple silk dress project. It's literally seconds after I filmed the outro of the last video, if you can't tell by the positioning of my cat, Dora. So yeah, we're starting back with the 1890s dress project. Last week we did the base of the skirt, which is behind me somewhere. There we go. And that skirt just needs the ruffle put on now. So the ruffle is slightly gradiated, I guess would be the best term to say it. Meaning that it's a much shallower ruffle in the front, much shorter ruffle than it is in the back where it's significantly longer because it kind of goes around the skirt and up as it gets towards the back. Now that said, it's a pretty deep ruffle anyway. If you know me and you know this channel, you know that I like to scale things. So despite the fact that the first scaling that I did on this skirt last week didn't quite work, my intention is to start out by scaling this ruffle and seeing how long should the front of it be, how long should the side of it be, because I mean, if we look at the one picture that I so far have here, that's all we can see. We can't see the back. So hopefully it will just continue up that sort of gradual rise as it gets to the back. But we're going to measure that and scale that up using algebra, because that's just what I do, you know, finding X, etc. And we'll see how deep that needs to be. And then the other thing that I've been trying to figure out is how this little top detail of the ruffle is made from this one grainy image. So I posted a poll on Instagram last night seeing what you think that is made out of, basically to see if we have one large ruffle and then a little ruche detail on top, or if we have it all as one piece where basically there's kind of like a tuck going on within the really long ruffle, and that tuck has gathering on either side to create kind of this weird shirring effect. And to be honest, I do think that it is the latter. You guys disagreed. 20% of you said that it's probably all in one piece, and 79% of you said that it's probably two separate pieces. But honestly, I think that it is one piece because that's the type of things that Victorians just did. So I think that I want to do a little experiment and see if that's even feasible, and just take like a piece of fabric, doesn't even have to be the silk, but just take a piece of fabric, attempt to make that tuck situation and see if I can get that to look like it does in the extant one. Now, I know that right now I only have this one image. I am hoping that maybe that might change this week. I just want to say a huge thank you to Nicole over on Instagram, who helped to connect me with, I think she's one of the curators at the Cincinnati Art Museum. All of the emails and communication that I have tried to send to Cincinnati Art Museum have gone either completely unanswered or have literally bounced back. Like their email that they list on their website for curators, you can't actually send email to it unless you're within the organization, just as a heads up. So yeah, I actually heard a message back from one of the curators, and she said that she should be able to send me some additional images this week. So hopefully that comes true, because this one image is not even high resolution and it's kind of hard to tell what's going on, not to mention it doesn't even show the back. So yeah, hopefully I'll have a little bit more details on that. But I do want to dive in before that might happen, which is why we're going to start with that ruffle, because I feel like hopefully we can't screw up the ruffle. So I'm going to do the math, figure out how tall it is, and I'm going to do a test piece to figure out if I can do the ruffle all as one piece, and we'll go from there. So quick little update, because it is now Thursday and I have done very little on this project this week. Mostly I've been doing, you know, life things like taxes and also Lion stuff. I'll give you an update on Lion in just a moment. But the one thing that I did do is that I have scaled to the best of my ability this ruffle on the skirt. So I say to the best of my ability because I still have not heard back from the person at the Cincinnati Art Museum on additional pictures. So this is still the only picture that I have to go off of, which of course does not show the back. So I scaled up this part and I scaled up this part, which is kind of the side back. This very front part should be 16.86 inches tall, including the upper portion of the ruffle. The back side part here should be 19.16 inches. So that is the only stuff that I've done on the skirt portion of the dress. I do have bodice planning updates though, but first a little bit of an update about Lion, because I know that you all want to know. I was actually able to get him seen for his initial consultation about a week and a half earlier than when they had initially scheduled me. So he did go in on Tuesday. They are hopeful that they can remove the whole lump. We'll see, fingers crossed. That appointment for the removal is not until the 17th. So he will have some recovery ahead of him there. And it's going to be really, really expensive. By the time you are watching this, I will have set up a GoFundMe. Thank you to all of you who have already donated, by the way. If you haven't and you do want to donate to Lion's surgery that is potentially going to cost an additional $7,900, I think, besides the $1,400 that I already spent on him for the initial consultation. If you want to help with contributing to that, the link to the GoFundMe information will be down in the description. Thank you so much. If you are able to, please do not feel obligated if you cannot or don't want to. You know, totally up to you. But yeah, that is where everything stands on Lion. And of course, while I was at the vet with Lion, Dora hurt her tail somehow. So right now I've been monitoring her for the last like day and a half to see, do we need to go into the vet for her tail or will she be okay? She's still pretty low energy, so I'm starting to get a little bit concerned. I thought she was on the up and up yesterday and now she's still kind of low energy. So we might be going into the vet for her tomorrow as well. So we'll see how that goes. But let's talk about evening bodices. So I've kind of been going back and forth on plans with the evening bodice, trying to figure out what sort of design I want to do, and honestly even like when in the 1890s I want to place it. And part of what's throwing me off so much is that this dress, like on the museum website, is actually dated 1905 to 1906. I don't know where that number came from because almost everything about this dress to me looks like it's in the 1890s. And I mean, we have the big sleeves, we have the more tightly fitted bodice in general, the high neckline, the skirt shape, even with the exception of the ruffle, it's a very 1890s skirt shape. Now, that said, the ruffle is not something that you often see on an 1890s dress. That is more common going into the 1900s. So it's possible that this could have been kind of remade, but honestly, it's unlikely. The designer of this, so first off, I realized as I was going through the Cincinnati Art Museum website, this designer, which is Anna Dunleavy, she was a Cincinnati-based designer and dressmaker. She's actually the same designer, and it's also at the Cincinnati Art Museum, of the dress that I used as the inspiration for my jumper dress, which is this red velvet one right here that I made back in, I think that was 2020 already. That was that long ago. But yeah, same designer, same museum, and I just didn't put two and two together on that. And that jumper dress is obviously a later design. The Cincinnati Art Museum does have several dresses from Anna Dunleavy that kind of span the years in the 1890s and 1900s, so you know, that doesn't necessarily help. But again, this dress to me, unless it's like taking a lot of kind of out of fashion elements, which seems odd for like kind of a nice high fashion dress, it is, to me, it's an 1890s dress, not a 1900s dress. But it's still like giving me pause as to, you know, where do I place myself for the evening gown, for the ball gown bodice, because I have options on what I want to do since I'm not, you know, recreating a bodice on this. And the skirts are fairly basic, like it can kind of work with, again, anytime. So I was looking at a whole bunch of bodices on Pinterest. If you go to my 1890s Pinterest page, which I'll link down below if you want to check it out, it is just kind of a mess of like all of the inspiration that I was doing as I was kind of like dealing with my own emotional lows from Lion and from Dora, and just, you know, scrolling my phone. I was just scrolling 1890s Pinterest basically. And I came across a lot of bodices, and I have posted a lot of them to Instagram for you guys to look at and for you guys to give me your opinions on as well. Obviously, you're seeing this way later than when I posted, and I've made decisions at this point because I posted kind of a few bodices that were more of a fitted bodice through like the bodice part, and then we're a little bit more floofy when it came to the upper neckline and the sleeves. And one in particular, this one right here, had this wrap front element that I really like the look of, and I think it's very unique, but I wasn't a big fan of these ruffled lace sleeves. Those, by the way, are late, like 1897 to 99 type bodices. But then I also posted a lot of bodices that were more mid 1890s that kind of have a gathered front. A lot of times you'd get a large fitted sash, then a gathered front, and then lots of big lace on the shoulders and humongous poofy sleeves. So that was kind of another option. And then there's also stuff like these two bodices right here. These are both Worth gowns, I believe. And obviously they're taking different textures like velvet and just kind of combining a whole lot of elements. I believe these are from about 1896. And I think they're very interesting, but also would be more complicated to make because they have more elements. And I'd have to see if I even have any sort of like velvet type fabric that could go with them. Because obviously with all these vet bills, I'm not buying fabric right now, or at least I'm really trying hard not to. So those are kind of my options. And after I posted those, I found this right here. This right here is the Honorable Violet Monckton, and it is a painting that is apparently from 1899, though the larger sleeves make me think earlier. I mean, obviously, you know, the painting was painted the year that it was painted, but the dress itself feels a little bit earlier to me. But it does also have that wrap front detail and a little bit more of the frothiness to the neckline and the sleeves. And I'm thinking that that is really, really pretty. And I think it would be very pretty in my purple fabric too. Yes, I just did like a brightly colored silk with poofy white sleeves dress. There's the 1830s, but fashion always borrows from itself, right? So you actually see 1830s elements a lot in 1890s fashion. So in a way, it would kind of be interesting to do something that like harkens to something that I kind of just did. But the sleeves are a little different. I believe hers are a double puff sleeve, and it would be out of the silk organza, which I should have plenty of, I hope. And then we'd also have the silk organza on the neckline, and we'd have that wrap front detail with a little pointed bit in the waist. I really appreciate though that this pointed waist wrap front bodice here, this is from the Met, and they have lovely close-up images, including the back. Like, it's wonderful. We can see how everything comes together. This type of bodice, I assume it's going to be kind of the same for the portrait dress. This type of bodice, the closures are hidden. So basically the under portion of the bodice is going to come and be at the natural waistline, and same with like the part that wraps under. And there's going to be most likely a series of closures that are happening kind of to the side here. Now, I haven't figured out all of the engineering of this. It's possible that there's additional layers and hidden closures under here, but basically there's a fitted layer underneath that things are mounted onto, and then there's going to be hidden closures that go across as that upper layer comes across the bodice, and that upper layer has that point as part of it. So obviously this is not your standard bodice. This is going to be a little bit complicated. I'm hoping that I can kind of take my typical Victorian bodice pattern and just alter it to get there. And I'm hoping that I can do a lot of that this week, because next week I am actually going to California to visit my parents for a few days, and I would love to be able to have hand sewing with me. So I'd love to be able to get far enough on this bodice to be able to get to the point where I can do hand sewing while I'm in California, which means I am actually going to put aside the ruffle of the skirt right now, because the bodice is more important, because I want to get myself to the hand sewing part, and I don't want to bring a skirt to hand sew. Even though the hem probably will get hand sewn on that ruffle, I am not bringing that with me to California. So bodice it is. So yeah, let's go ahead and just dive into seeing how we can take my standard bodice pattern and turn it into this sort of wrap front configuration to get to an amazing late 1890s ball gown bodice. Mock-up number 1 is on. It's always very important to put on like all of your skirt layers when you are looking at mock-ups for bodices, because it very much affects the way that they fit both below the waist, and then obviously you want your corset and like, you know, chemise, etc. for above, just to make sure that everything fits right. And this one doesn't. This mock-up is way too big. So I already have like a whole fan kind of pinned out here. It's like probably 2 inches deep, where I intended this to be 1/2 inch, just like seam allowance. So yeah, and it does vary, like it's narrower over the bust as to how far it's too big. Still is like 1.25 inches probably too big over the bust. But yeah, a lot of that needs to be taken in. I can also feel that it is loose in the back. I think you can see that it is loose in the back, so that needs to be fixed. And honestly, I think it's a little bit loose in the sides, like the arm size are just feeling big. So I'm gonna put this on inside out and pin everything out so that I can then remove all of that excess. But yeah, definitely too large. So I mean, better too large than too small. Oh, and too long. It's way too long back here. It should be sitting like at my waist. So lots of changes to make. So as you can see, I have taken it in pretty significantly. It was really the side seams and the back seam that I took it in so much. In fact, I'm not even sure how much on the back seam, but I think it was like this much on each side. And then the side seams, I took out 1 inch total by the top and 1/2 inch at the waist. I also folded up the bottom edge pretty significantly to get rid of that extra length. The front is actually a bit better than it was. I didn't cut anything off, but by taking in elsewhere, I've now got a lot of the front close-ish to where it should be with that 1/2 inch seam allowance. Like it's spot on there. Still needs to have a little more taken out through this area down here. The one thing that I'm wondering at this point is if I should take the back neckline down any lower. I think I'm probably going to leave it as is because I worry that if I take it lower, the engineering of the bodice will change. Like if I lower it, then it might get loose along the back, and right now it's a really nice fit. So I think it's probably safer to leave it as it is. And also, to be honest, I put it at this height because I don't tend to like lower back things. I have a lot of, you know, back fat above the top of the corset. I mean, you can see that bump right there that's being created, and I like to just cover that up as much as possible. The other thing that I'm a little bit disappointed in is that I really actually like this neckline level. I did already fold in the seam allowances, by the way, both on the neckline and down on the hem, like I mentioned. And I like this neckline level, so it's a bummer that this chemise is showing above it. I don't know if, I suppose I could probably lengthen the straps since they're just ribbon straps. So I probably could lengthen the straps just to be able to get that a little bit lower because this is a good height neckline. 1890s ball gown necklines did vary a lot. You see them a lot at this level. You see some that are a little bit higher. You don't see that many that are lower. Like this bodice, this is definitely lower. It's lower in both the front and also in the back. But that's kind of an exception, I feel like, to a lot of 1890s bodices, particularly mid 1890s. They tended to be a lot higher, and then you also have like all of the ruffles that kind of just build things up and make things look bigger. But yeah, I think that that is really good overall. I think I like the shape of the point as well down here. I don't think I want to cut it away any more than that. They did vary. I mean, the one that I just showed you from the Met, that one is obviously very pointy, but like this one that's in the portrait is really a pretty shallow point. So I think that this is kind of a good compromise in something like that. Generally speaking, the bodices of this era, even if they were pointed in the front, they were actually flat in the back. So they would hit the waistband and not go into a point. That's more common. You might have some extra decorations at the waistband, but they were flattened usually to hit the waistband. And then generally speaking, you would see that the bodice would hook to the waistband so that you don't get any gap as you're like moving, dancing, etc. So yeah, I think that's a really successful mock-up right now. So I have to cut off all of the excess that I still have in these seams. I just kind of opened up the old seam allowances and pressed them, so there's a lot of excess in there. But once I cut off the excess length and the excess width, I can transfer this information to my pattern so that I can potentially save it for later, because I'm not sure why this seems so much smaller than when I normally do bodices, because I'm using the same pattern that I always do with all of my different colored lines on it. I mean, this is the back piece right here, so it's not the one that looks quite as colorful, but you can see all of the lines like down at the tail. The front piece is even more so than this. But yeah, I don't know. This one's smaller for some reason, so whatever. And then once I go to actually cut this out of the real fabric, I am tempted, I must admit, to actually use this as my like flat lining for the bodice. The one caveat with that is that I was not caring which side of the fabric I used. This is sateen, so one side is shiny, one side is not shiny, and I wasn't caring which side of the fabric. So maybe what I'll do is I will recut the couple of pieces that are like the reverse of what they should be, because honestly I think this would work pretty decently for the interior as far as like the flat lining goes. A lot of times they did use polished cotton, and this is basically a polished cotton, and I don't even know that I have twill right now. But then I also have to figure out how all of those layers go, because again, once we have the center front closure here, we are, I think, going to have a sort of a base layer that all of the organza fluffiness is mounted on, which is going to close across, and then the V part is going to come across that. And so that is probably going to be silk mounted onto a flat fabric, maybe like a muslin even or something like that, because the silk that's in the portrait at least is kind of pleated and draped across, and I do like that look. I think that without having the embroidery of the bodice from the Met, that gives interest, that gives visual interest, and I can't just have it pleated onto nothing. It needs to be pleated onto a base, and so since that again wraps across, that needs to have its own base. So I do have to figure those out, but we're at least one step closer. And the back pieces at least can just be cut out same as the interior. So something that I decided to do while I still had this on was to draw in the lines for those like upper sections. And so I don't know how well you can see this, but I've actually decided to widen the neckline just a little bit here. I think this is about 3/4 of an inch wider, and just a tiny bit lower here to flatten out, because right now I'm very sweetheart and I honestly wanted this to be flatter. Most of the necklines of the 1890s are flatter. So I opened that up a little bit, or I will anyway. And then this line that goes across here, this is the wrap over line, and I'm going to copy this section of that line onto the other side, and that will be the wrap underside. That part is going to be built just to the structure of the bodice underneath, like just to this bit here. And then there's going to be the part in the middle that fills in this way, that's going to be like attached to that as a separate piece, and it's going to go over and then over. So yeah, that's kind of where things will map out on there, just to give me a little bit of an idea. I am probably going to be doing a little bit of the ruched organza in the back as well, but of course I can't map that out on myself, so I'm not 100% positive how that's going to work. And honestly, I don't 100% know if I want that on the back. I think I'm going to see how many back views of bodices I can find. So I think I might do a little more research before I decide if we want ruched organza on the back or if we just want to do solid back. Obviously solid back is a lot easier, but will it look as good? That would be the question. So yeah, okay, new development there. And I've marked my new centers, and that's pretty good. So now I can take this off and transfer it to new pieces. As you might be able to see, these were the two panels that I had cut on the reverse side of the fabric, trying to, like, you know, just not use up as much fabric, but I'm going to recut those, and then I'm going to trace all of these onto the pattern pieces and continue the line that's on the bust over on this side as well. I've cut off all the excess at this point. Little update on Dora. She just had her surgery. She's feeling a little loopy. She's back in her cone for the next 2 weeks, so she's going to overlap with Lion a few days with cones. And she's got staples and stitches in her tail, poor thing. So yeah, that's Dora. Now let's look at the bodice. And that's the bodice. It is only the back of the bodice. That's all I've done so far. We have all 3 of the pieces, well, 6 really, 3 times 2 of the pieces of the back. They have all been flat lined with the same fabric that I used for the mock-up, except for the 2 pieces that I recut. And so that looks all great. I've transferred all those pattern markings over. For the bodice front, I did actually have to just like cut a whole new piece that I'm going to to save with the other patterns because it laid out completely differently. It was like actually a lot larger going this way and very curvy on this edge. So I couldn't really like copy those markings to what I already had in there. So this is just going to wind up joining my folder. I still have to mark my darts in here, but otherwise it's going to wind up joining the folder. And now what I have to do is figure out exactly how all of this front bodice engineering works out. I decided I would just try and see what happens if I just literally like put the fabric on the form, and the bodice piece is technically under here, the fitted bodice piece with the darts in it, but just try and see what happens if I like pull the pleats that want to be pleated this way. But I feel like we're looking at a really different angle than the ones on the dress. So just to look at this, it's like they're starting lower, almost like at the bottom of the bust and going a little bit more horizontal. Whereas this one here is definitely starting at the top of the bust and then like we're going along the bust, and then we kind of run out of what we want to have pleats, and I feel like we want more pleats over here. This one technically is the side that's not the crossover side. So this is like the underneath side, and then the crossover comes around this way. But I just feel like that is not right. So I'm not really sure how best to go about this, because I thought like, okay, well maybe we cut out the strap section because that part should just be flat. And then we kind of leave the yardage on here loose and try and like pull it across and see what it wants to do while fitting it to the under section over here. As you can see, I already like didn't start this far enough over. I mean, this is literally just draped on the form and pinned in place, but I didn't start it far enough over. We have the hip peeking out and we can't do that. And then we've got a weird like pleat across the waist that we definitely don't want. So, yeah, I'm not really sure. I'm not skilled at draping, clearly. But I have to figure out how this is meant to work because I want that, not this. So here's test 2 with just pinning it in place. What I've done here is I've actually taken the fabric and I've flipped it onto the bias. So now instead of the straight grain matching up with the side seam, I actually have the bias, like the 45-degree angle is actually lining up with the side seam instead. And so I think that's giving me a lot more flexibility in how these pleats are forming. Though oddly enough, by doing that, the pleats actually become, I think, straight grain. No, they become cross grain. So the little kind of weave stripes that you're seeing here, this is the cross grain, and that is what's going into these pleats. Obviously, I have a lot more pleats this time. They are shallower, although we are still starting above the bust with like this one, because well, I guess we're still kind of below the bust because the bust is here. But yeah, there's shallower pleats, which I don't know if I love the shallower. I feel like it's maybe too many and too close together, but I think we're on the right track. So I might try one more time just to make these a little bit deeper and farther spaced and see what that will do. I am also not positive that I don't think there's any way to get around it, but that these pleats start from the bust here, and then these pleats that are below the bust are kind of starting from the side seam or from the armpit and coming down. But yeah, I feel like it's looking maybe a little bit busy, but we're closer. So this is actually only one less pleat than a second ago, but I feel like it looks way cleaner. Each of the pleats is a little bit deeper. I think you can actually see kind of the reverse of this pleat right here. But yeah, they're a little bit deeper. Now there's only 3 that go to the bust. I think there were 4 before. It does somehow create larger spaces, especially right here, and then a little bit as we go this way. I don't know if I mind that or not, but yeah, I think that might be what I'm looking for. Now the question is, can I translate that to matching it up to the bodice piece that's actually underneath it, and then likewise translate that to the other side where it crosses over a lot further? So that's going to be a difficult challenge there, but I think that might be correct. So while it was on the form, I pinned it in place to the underside. And I think what I'm going to do now is cut about like a 1-inch margin on all of the sides so that in case I need to do any squidging, I have a little bit of room, but at least I don't have all of this fabric attached to it that's going to get in the way. So I think that's what I'm going to attempt to do. I think it's smooth. The one place that I'm slightly concerned about is like literally right over the bust, just because that was where the pleats were kind of changing direction on the outside. But I think otherwise it is actually smooth, despite what it looks like here, now that it's not in a 3D form, though. Not sure about that part either. What I'm going to do now is baste around the outside of the strap, arm's eye, side seam, and maybe a little bit of the bottom. I did smooth this out. I know it looks wrinkled, but it's actually the same wrinkle on both sides now. But yeah, I think probably from about here up to there, because that way it will be everything that's not actually pleated. So the pleats are over here. I do still need to figure out, there's just kind of a weird thing going on right at the bust like that. So I'm hoping that I can get that after things are basted. I think it will be easier to do that way. Of course, on this side, because this is a side that gets crossed over, so much of these pleats are just going to be completely covered by the other cross, and it's this busty part that actually is showing. And granted, in the portrait, hers kind of looks messy as well. So like, it's not a big deal if it is maybe a little bit loose or whatever, but I'd like to get it as nice and clean as I can. I've basted the edges, which means that I was able to actually cut away so that it's right the same size as the structure layer underneath. And all of these pleats are pinned and partially pressed in place. Like, I have run an iron over them, but I don't like to iron silk where there is a pin. So I actually haven't ironed every spot where there is a pin, because that kind of leaves scars in the fabric. I did also press down this top edge, which is the cutaway edge. And then, as you can see, everything up here is basted in place as well. So now what happens? Well, there's, I guess, two things here. One, I want to do the insert layer. So from this side, the insert layer is going to be stitched down underneath this line where it's pinned. It's going to be stitched down, and then it's going to go across so that it's, you know, double this area right here. And that's going to have the organza ruched up and applied to that. So that is a piece that will then fold over the other side. The other thing that I realized is that I was editing this video before filming this clip that you see here, and I had mentioned initially that this side was actually only going to be cut straight across like this, and the point would only be on the other side. That may be something that I choose to do for now. Obviously, I've done the point on this side because I forgot that I mentioned that. And while that is probably a good idea because it means I don't have to overlap 2 points, because the exterior point is going to be like the full point. It's not going to be half of one side. So basically, I need to make sure that they would completely align up with the hooks and eyes and facing and everything on this. So in other words, it's still a very good idea. I may change that, but for now, I'm going to keep this mirrored. I can always change that later before I like put the facing on and everything. But yeah, so that's where we are at this moment. And I'm going to do that piece next before I have to figure out how to do all of the pleaty parts on the other side, but also mirror this and also make it go all the way across to here. But that bit, that side, that's going to be in the next video, just a heads up. By the way, with the order of how things work on this one under piece, I do actually need to put the facing on before I can put this center piece in, because the facing, like this, will be fully finished off on this edge before that centerpiece is on. I think that the top binding, I think that's going to go over both layers, like the organza part and also this part. I'm not 100% positive, but I think that's what's going to happen there. And then that binding would also go on the neckline. See, this is where it's very confusing, because I think the neckline binding is going to be made out of the silk, whereas this is going to be a white piece. So I don't know, maybe they have to be bound separately. I'm not 100% positive on that yet, but I know that this part has to be done first. So that's what I've got right here. I've cut facings just the exact same shape as the center front piece. I cut another one for the opposite side too, where they'll meet in the center, and those again will close with hooks and eyes kind of butting up to the edge. And this will get folded once the seam is sewn. This will get folded back and then turned around and pressed so that there's a 1-inch area of facing, and that gives a little bit more structure for the hooks and eyes to be attached to. So yeah, that's what's going on there. And then that centerpiece. I have cut out that center piece. Now, I took out the seam allowance that was in the center for this area, but then as you know from seeing the bodice pattern, it curves in pretty significantly. So I'm hoping that this shape will work, but I'm honestly not positive. However, I'm going to put organza on it anyway. I have my organza here. I'm going to go cross grain just because this, hi Dora, this organza is really narrow and hopefully my cat won't destroy it while I'm talking to you. And I'm going to ruche this up. However, as you may have guessed, you are not actually going to see that until next week's video because it is now Monday when I'm recording this outro and none of that ruching has happened yet. So I will be starting with that with next week and then putting the other pleaty side on with the part that crosses over. Those are kind of going to be the first two big things that I do next week, or at least in next week's video, because really it's this week for me. And I'm hopefully going to get all of that done and like facings on, ideally bindings or, you know, finishings on all by Wednesday evening because on Thursday I go down to visit my parents for a few days and I would love to have that hand sewing ready to do. So wish me luck in that. But again, that everything that I do there on the rest of this bodice is going to be next week's video. So hopefully you enjoyed this week's video, this installment. I feel like we actually got a fair amount done, so that's pretty cool. If you liked today's video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube at least once a week with sewing vlogs like this out on Tuesdays and sometimes additional costuming or sewing content out on Saturdays, but I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description below, or you can send me a super thanks or join my YouTube channel memberships right here on YouTube below the video. I'd also like to give a special shout out to my Edwardian level patrons, Jean and Dan. And again, the link to the GoFundMe is also down in the description below if you want to help support Lion and Dora's vet bills. But of course, no obligation for anything. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful week and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!